सेव किया था ना?
मैं सिर्फ इसलिए गया था क्योंकि उसने मुझे कॉल किया, that's it. But listen तो.
Save it for someone else.
जिंदगी में सेव करना जरूरी है, मगर जब बात पैसों की हो, सिर्फ सेविंग से काम नहीं चलेगा। इक्विटी म्यूचुअल फंड्स में इन्वेस्ट कीजिए और अपने सेविंग्स को आगे बढ़ने का मौका दीजिए।
Mutual fund investments are subject to market risks. Read all scheme-related documents carefully.
For the past week or 10 days, we've been seeing what look like doomsday pictures from Joshimath. Joshimath is a small town. It's not a city by Uttarakhand standards, by the standards of the remote areas of Uttarakhand, which are very difficult to inhabit. Yes, it's a sizable town of about 20,000 people. Maybe in the tourist season or pilgrimage season, about 20. In deep winter, maybe 16, 17. So it's a very small town. In other parts of, say, the Hindi heartland and most parts of the country, this will be just a village. But 16 to 20,000 people in the Himalayas at 6,150 feet, but surrounded by much higher Himalayas, and also on the route to much higher Himalayas in the course of many crisscrossing rivers and also at the foot of many crisscrossing glaciers. This is a very precariously located town of, as I said, about 20,000 people. And you will see these pictures as we move along. You can see these cracks. It looks very bad. It looks very bad for anybody. It looks very bad, worse even when it happens to your own fellow compatriots from your own country. It looks even worse. Imagine how does it look if you live in the city where it's happening, and finally, how disastrous it is if it happens in the home where you are living, or if it's a little business that you built. In this case, in the case of Joshimath, most of it which will be small lodges and tiny hotels, or what passes off for hotels. That means you put in your life's earnings, savings, and maybe borrowings to set up this place, because now you know that the roads are improving. There is a promise of a ropeway coming up. This is bang on the route of so many places of pilgrimage, right? So you think that an investment into a tiny hotel or a lodge here would be worth your while, would be very good. And then you find the ground is cracking up, or the walls of your home or building or a hotel have broken. So this is a bit like, in Hindi we might say, पांव तले धरती खिसक गई, right? मेरे पैरों के नीचे से धरती निकल गई, or the ground slipped from under my feet. In this case, the ground isn't just slipping under my feet, but the ground is cracking open under my feet. This sounds horrible. Now, we will talk about the science and the analysis of this in the next 10-15 minutes. But also, we have to see what happens when such things happen. Human beings have a lot of resilience, right? At the same time, sometimes too much resilience, because human beings also sometimes are unrealistic when it comes to their dealings with nature. Now, there are three ways of looking at this, three ways of addressing this issue. First of all, we have to understand what this issue is. This is old. This is not something that happened yesterday. This has been happening since there have been mountains and glaciers and rivers in this region. So say for the past 150 years or so, since we've seen some historic records, there have been some disasters. There's been land subsidence. This is called land subsidence. जब धरती नीचे बैठ जाती है. So this is land subsidence in this region. There have been earthquakes in this region. This is the seismic zone 5, so very, very fragile seismologically. This has many rivers coming in. Rivers are coming in, water courses are coming in at an incline. So as the water comes down, it gathers a great deal of momentum, particularly as it picks up loose rock and sand on the way. So that is debris coming at you, or boulders coming at you at some speed. And with that speed, can you imagine the force it gathers? And we've seen this happen in 2021 in the same general area near what is called as the Tapovan Vishnugarh project, being implemented by NTPC, National Thermal Power Corporation. This is 4 plants of 130 megawatts each. So say 520 megawatt plant. That is where this big ice rock disaster had taken place, and lots of people had got buried, and part of the project had also got buried. So this is a very fragile zone. which has seen trouble for 150 years. Now, having accepted that fact, because these are facts, you can't deny them, this is geology, this is nature, this is the river Ganges, this is the Himalayas, and this is also probably the most fragile zone of the Himalayas. We know that the Himalayas are the youngest big mountain in the world, but within the Himalayas, this is probably the most fragile zone in the Himalayas, partly because there are so many rivers, water courses. This is the larger Ganga-Jamuna system. In this area particularly, the Ganga system, and also then the glaciers higher up. Now, what do you do when something like this happens in a place like Joshimath? In fact, over time, more than 400 villages in the same general area, in the same general geography. When I say general area, sounds like walking distance from Joshimath. No, not that, but in the same general geography. And see this map of Uttarakhand and see this zone with Teri Garhwal on one side, Pithoragarh on the other, very sparsely populated, very mountainous, with a lot of inclines, very jagged and ragged, and no surprise that a lot of people have been migrating from Uttarakhand to the rest of the country to work. So over the decades, in fact, I'd say over the centuries, people from Uttarakhand have gone to the mainland to find work because Uttarakhand has no industry. Not much industry is possible in the mountains. At least the Uttarakhand mountains have no industry. Uttarakhand has some plains areas like Pantnagar, Hardwar, etc., which might have some industry, or Dehradun, but the mountains industry is not possible. So people have been leaving. They've been joining the armed forces. They've been working in the cities at various levels. So Uttarakhand is a people exporting state. Now people saw a hope, and the hope was that we have tourism, and tourism still has limitations. How many people can go, say, to Mussoorie and pay how much money? And Mussoorie is only one place. But because we have these places of pilgrimage, Badrinath, Kedarnath, Hemkund Sahib for the Sikhs, right? Rishikesh and Hardwar in any case, and then Dev Prayag and Karn Prayag and Shankaranand temple and so on and so forth. And Modi government is now putting this Char Dham Yatra highway, said they are widening the road, making it a first class mountain road. Also, they are taking the railways quite deep into Uttarakhand. They are tunneling for it also. So maybe a new economy will come up. So people have found comfort. So people, maybe some are going back, maybe some are building businesses, but they are counting on tourism from pilgrimage. And that depends on this infrastructure construction. So the first question that arises, has this happened now in Joshimath because of this infrastructure construction and also because of the dam building activity? The dam building activity for now is stopped because of the disasters in Joshimath's vicinity, but these questions arise. So first of all, as I said, three issues, three options. Which one do we follow? Number one option is now say, oh, this is too fragile and too dangerous. So evacuate and abandon, bhago, right? You can evacuate 20,000 people. It isn't that much of a disaster. It's a disaster for people who have to leave their homes. But if it's a question of survival, you can relocate 20,000 people. This is not a city like Jakarta. So city like Jakarta, which is the fastest sinking city in the world, capital of Indonesia, is among the biggest cities in the world. I don't know the latest population count, but it's somewhere, if you look at Greater Jakarta, etc., it would be somewhere between about 1.25 to 1.5 crores, right? That city is sinking. That city is sinking because of overexploitation of groundwater. Some of that might also be a problem with Joshimath, but we'll come to that in a minute. So if it was a question of evacuating and abandoning Jakarta, you'll say, that's not possible, right? But if it's 20,000, in any case, you've declared 400 villages unlivable in Uttarakhand. So what is this? This is just an overgrown village. But that's not anybody's idea, because you want Uttarakhand to find a way of being at peace with itself, while at the same time being able to prosper. So not everybody has to leave for jobs elsewhere. In the case of many people from Uttarakhand, also to work as casual labor, etc., etc. For many of them, if local economy is built, particularly around pilgrimage tourism, that would be much more remunerative. So evacuate and abandon is really not an idea. And how much will you evacuate and abandon in these reaches of Uttarakhand? You cannot evacuate Badrinath, Kedarnath, Shankaracharya temples or the Hemkund Gurdwara and tell people, all right, you can only go there by helicopter. That means only very few people, and that too rich people, will be able to go to these pilgrimage centers. Also, it will be cruel to the population. So the first option doesn't work very well. The second option is do patchwork and band-aid. That is actually the worst option. That is, today abandon the buildings which are damaged, right, or areas which are seeing the cracks, and build and allow similar stuff to come up elsewhere, right? So for now, it look like, and give each one owner of each one of these buildings some money, right? In India, even if there's a big disaster, the first thing our politicians do anywhere, any party, is to sanction money to the family. They know that families are poor, right? Even in a case of a horrible rape, gang rape, and murder of a woman, the first thing would be, if the woman is from a poor family, to offer relief to the family, because that's also a way of buying the silence of the family and to calm down the headline. So you can do all that. You can give people a bit more money, maybe more than what building a new place will cost, and let them and demarcate some areas that look safer for now and let them build again. That will be a patchwork and band-aid solution, not a good idea. Absolutely the worst idea, because then what's happened just now will happen again. So how many places will you change then? And third is simple, the toughest and probably the wisest, which is come back to our senses. It's also the toughest, because coming back to your senses means responding with some humility. So this is humility about nature, that look, I'm coming in the way of nature. Nature is not coming in my way. And I will explain to you over the next couple of minutes why this is like coming in the way of nature. So then say, I'm not coming in the way of nature. I am giving nature its way. I am relocating myself where there is, we talk about man-animal conflict, human-animal conflict. In this case, there is human-nature conflict. So the way to minimize that is not to get out of the way of nature and go someplace else, right? It is to learn to live with nature. And that is coming to your senses, which would mean relocating yourselves in a way that you are not in the way of watercourses, relocating yourselves in a place on the ground which is actually firm ground and not just an agglomeration of glacial moraine. You know what happens when glaciers recede? They leave moraine behind. Now, what is moraine? This is conquered, pathar, boulders, stones, sands, boulders, rocks that glaciers leave behind. There, if you build your habitations or townships or cities, you are asking for trouble, because wherever a glacier has been, wherever a river or a watercourse or a rivulet has been, you can be absolutely sure that it will revisit that place, because once a rivulet, a river, a watercourse, a glacier has discovered an area, it will revisit that area. If you go and sit there and say this is flat ground, a river created it, it's right now dry, or a glacier created it, then you are waiting for that glacier or the river to come down and take you with it. And that's happened in Uttarakhand, in these mountains, many times. In fact, if I can give you some data, some broad data. So say between 2000 and 2009, this is all Government of India data. 2000 to 2009, about 433 to 440 lives were lost in disasters in Uttarakhand, generally in the same region. The decade of 2010 to 2020, 1312 or 1315 lives were lost in this region. Again, in 2021 alone, more than 300 lives were lost. And remember, that was that ice rock storm that came down at this Tapovan Vishnugad dam site. This is a dangerous area. Now, why does it happen there? Talk to some experts. So, Kalachan Sain, you've seen him on most TV channels. You've seen him interviewed in most newspapers. He tells you he is a foremost scientist in this area. He is also the director of Dehradun-based Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology. Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology, by the way, started as Delhi University's geology department, was relocated to Dehradun, and there it was built up, and then it was named after Dr. D.N. Wadia, Professor D.N. Wadia, who was seen as its founder, and that naming was done in 1976. So Kalachan Sen, or Professor Kalachan Sen, is now the director of Wadia Institute of Himalayan Geology, and he says the same thing. He says, look, Joshimath is set up in a place which is built on debris, it's weak ground. It is not sitting on a rock as many other cities do, and these are moving sands in the mountains. Also, it comes in the way of too many things, and it's not something that's been discovered now. Almost 50 years ago, in fact in 1976, so that is 48 years ago, there was a report by the MC Mishra committee, and that MC Mishra committee also pointed at the same things. You will find some details on that in a story that my colleague Simran Surur has done. I'm sharing a link of the whole story with you. You will also see a screenshot of the front page just now. Now, if you see from this report, from which Simran quotes, it tells you that this is the old landslide zone. This was pointed out in this 1976 report. Second, in 2009, it is here that an aquifer was punctured. Now, what is an aquifer that's punctured? We know that there is groundwater, and particularly in the Himalayan region, this is a very riverine region. There is a lot of water underground. So the tunnel boring machine working at this Tapovan Vishnugarh project in 2009, this had gone right through an underground aquifer, very deep in the ground, almost 700-800 meters deep. It had gone straight into an aquifer and the machine got stuck. But as a result, because it punctured the aquifer, so much water came out. And how much water came out and how much water is coming out now? So Simran in her story also quotes Harsh Vats, who is a geologist at Indian Institute of Remote Sensing at Dehradun, IIRSD, which also has its own studies, and that institute, IIRSD, has now been committing a deformation study. What is a deformation study? This picks satellite imagery. So through this satellite imagery, what does it do? It studies and analyzes the acceleration or the pace of land subsidence in the region. That report apparently is going to come out very soon. Again, going back to the MC Mishra 1976 report, that said this place stands on a deposit of sand and stone. This is not the main rock. This is not suitable for a township. This was 1976. Lekin sunta kaun hai? Because you know what happens? When times are good, you think, what? This happened in the past. This will not happen again. But everything that happened in the past vis-a-vis nature will happen again. So either you should have the ability to prevent it from happening, or you should get out of the way, which means you learn to live with it, give nature its way, and doing your own thing. So this 1976 study had also said that there should not be any removal of boulders in this area, also no blasting, but a lot of construction is going on there. The Chardham highway is going on, and now there are other plans as well. And as I told you, railways are not quite reaching here, but railways in the Himalayas, and this is one ecosystem, so everything shakes. Piyush Rautela is the other guy who's being quoted a lot. Piyush Rautela heads the disaster management department of Uttarakhand government. He wrote a peer-reviewed paper in 2010, Simran tells us, which said that every second 700 to 800 liters of water is now getting lost from the aquifer in this area, which means up to 70 million liters of water is being lost in a day. And what happens when that aquifer is emptying out? That aquifer is like a foundation on which everything is resting. When that's emptying out, that itself causes a problem, and he's now been quoted as saying, again in Simran's story, he had said in his earlier paper, in his peer-reviewed paper in 2010, that sudden and large-scale dewatering of the strata has the potential to initiate ground subsidence. So papers of his, I'm sharing screenshots with you, and I'm also sharing links to the whole papers. Now, what is the future? What can be done? Maybe that's a subject for another episode of Cut the Clutter, and we'll do that in the course of time, because this problem is not about to go away. But the thing that everybody talks about is microzonation, which means, this is the zone and these are the challenges. So you create micro zones, or you demarcate micro zones, which are nothing is risk-free, which are the least risk prone. But the more important thing there, and this is a little bit of my own amateur opinion, also look at your construction methods. You know, we in India have got too concrete and rock obsessed. We are using so much more marble, so much more rock, so much more concrete in our construction. Learn from communities and countries which have learned to live in seismic zones. The Japanese, for example, within our own country, I spent 3 years living in the Northeast between 1981 and 83. I was in Shillong. There were earthquakes there all the time, you know, all the time. It was a bit like suddenly you saw a Loki, a bottle god, sitting on the shelf of a kitchen, shaking like this, right? You took it in your stride. Why? Because your homes were built on stilts. They were built with wood, very light, built with stilts. And if an earthquake came, they also shook with the earthquake. And you knew, God forbid, even if a very heavy earthquake comes, even if it collapses, it will not be like a concrete slab collapsing on your head. It will be a very lightly built. Surely you will go down with it, or it will come down on you. But chances of your surviving that, in fact, without serious injury, are very good. Again, in Assam, a lot of the construction was carried out with what was called as hollow brick. This is lighter brick which is hollow from the inside. Again, it makes for very good earthquake proofing. So if you can do all of that, if you can go light in your construction, particularly in zones like this. So first, demarcate a micro zone which may be less risky than the rest, and then specify construction methods. Otherwise, you can build maybe 18-inch walls, 24-inch walls. You can build any size of walls. You can build the Great Wall of China, but what happens? When the ground under you breaks, right, then where will the wall go? Ultimately, the wall will go inside the ground. So once again, humility with nature. That's my humble opinion. Humility in our interactions with nature is a most important need. So that is the lesson that these cracks in Joshimath are teaching us again. And by the way, as I conclude, let me also remind you that Simran Sirur has now reached Joshimath. She is accompanied by Shyam Nandan with camera, and just watch out for their coverage coming out from the spot in Uttarakhand.